Okay, part 7. Schwartz and Weiss. Let's go, milady, the reading room. We'll take you. The two rabbits spoke again, then they promptly started walking to the back end of the office. It was clear they wanted us to follow them, but those of us from Aaronfest merely exchanged glances. As students, we weren't sure whether we were allowed to go where they were leading us. Thankfully, Solange intervened. Schwartz, Weiss, that is not the door for visitors, she said with a small smile. Your new lady is not a librarian, so please treat her as you would any other guest. I could infer from her words that there was a door further inside the office that led directly into the library's workspace. Schwartz and Weiss turned around and instead started shuffling to the entrance we had come in through. When they reached the door, they held it wide open for us. This way. Milady is a visitor. I noticed that the rabbits were wearing short-sleeved dresses, likely because they had been made to move around and work. The black rabbit Schwartz wore a white dress, while the white rabbit Weiss wore a black one, so both their outfits contrasted with their fur. Over their dresses, they wore vests decorated with a variety of colorful embroidery. The gleaming stones that served as buttons looked a lot like face stones, so I could guess that their clothes were very expensive. Never before had I seen walking magic tools like these, so I couldn't help but assume Schwartz and Weiss were pretty rare and valuable. Professor Solange, is there any danger of Schwartz and Weiss being abruptly kidnapped or stripped of all their clothing? I asked. I must say I am quite worried about them. Schwartz and Weiss were built for working in the library, so they cannot operate outside it, aside from when accompanying their master. Furthermore, while I am not too well informed on this myself, many of their previous masters throughout history held similar concerns, and so they covered them with various protective charms to prevent any kidnapping. They are safe as long as they are in the library. That is reassuring to hear. I admittedly still felt somewhat uneasy, but I followed Schwartz and Weiss out of Solange's office nonetheless. Milady, this way. The two rabbits guided our party down the hall. It was exceedingly adorable how their heads and ears bobbed as they shuffled around. I wasn't sure who had made them, but our tastes in cute things seemed to align perfectly. Just as that thought crossed my mind, I heard a dreamy sigh coming from behind me. How lovely they are, someone said. I turned to see Lysletta gazing at Schwartz and Weiss, her green eyes sparkling with life. It was a rare sight, considering that she usually acted extremely calm for her age. She came back to her senses the moment she realized she had caught my attention, returning to her usual neutral smile, but I could tell she was completely smitten with the rabbits. The fact she kept stealthily glancing at them was a clear giveaway. I am glad to see you have also taken a liking to Schwartz and Weiss, Lysletta. Well, I raise shoe mills at home, and this is my first time seeing ones that are this large and capable of speech, magic tools or otherwise. I can't quite contain my excitement, Lysletta replied, a relieved smile playing on her lips as she let her eyes wander back to the rabbits. Her gaze was overflowing with hopeless adoration. It was cute to see her so enamored, but there was something she had said that caught my attention. Shoe mills, you say? I carefully eyed Schwartz and Weiss while digging through my memory, trying to remember when I had heard that term before. It was on the tip of my tongue, and as I continued racking my brain, Lysletta began a happy speech about shoe mills. Actual shoe mills are fey beasts no taller than my knees, and they are often raised by nobles as pets. They naturally cannot speak like these magic dolls can, instead communicating with chirps that sound a bit like pooey. Have you never seen one before, Lady Rosemine? They love rut-rubs, and they are especially cute when they start vigorously chewing away at one. That they chirp like pooey? Oh, you remember Sylvester doing that, do you? The realization suddenly hit me, and I grimaced as memories of my not-so-pleasant first meeting with Sylvester flooded back into my mind. I cannot say by whom exactly, but I was once told that I resemble a shoe mill. Oh my, now that you mention it, your golden eyes are quite similar, and your dark, silky hair is much like the fur of many shoe mill I've seen. Whoever made this observation was almost certainly praising your cuteness. Yeah, I don't think so. He poked my cheek and forced me to say pooey. That doesn't seem very praise-like to me. I also recalled that Ferdinand had told me to make my high beast a shoe mill the first time he had seen Lessie. I actually might have followed his advice had I known they were rabbit-like fey beasts, but by this point my mental image of high beast was locked in on the panda bus. It wouldn't be easy to change now, and I didn't want to anyway. Here, milady, the reading room, Schwartz and Weiss said as they opened the thick double doors. Behind them, I could see rows upon rows of wooden bookshelves standing some distance away from the walls, close to the center of the room. There were way, way more than any in the book rooms I had seen in Aaronfest. So many books, so many books. I've never been so happy. I'm actually on the verge of tears. There were so many bookshelves here as there were in some small city libraries I had visited back in my Arano days, or perhaps as many as there were in a side building attached to a huge public library. This was my first time ever seeing somewhere with enough books to be called a library in this world, and my heart was fluttering with joy. This is simply splendid, I proclaimed. I'm so happy I could cry. I must praise the God. No. You haven't even gone inside yet, Wolfried cried out in surprise. Cornelius rested a hand on my shoulder and warned me not to give any blessings, while Riarda once again repeated that I was not allowed to read any of the books. Had she not said that, there was no doubt in my mind I would have rushed to the nearest bookcase and immediately started rifling through its treasures. Schwartz and Weiss looked up at me with wide eyes, watching her back and forth by the doors. Milady? Inside? Yes, right, here we go. My heart pounded as I took my first step inside and started looking around. The right-hand side of the library had a section without windows, as well as a counter for official business. There were a few doors along the wall, one of which I could guess led into Solange's office, presumably so the librarians could more conveniently enter and leave the library. Ornately carved wooden partitions snaked around the reading room, tall enough that they seemed to reach up to my shoulders and everyone else's waists. The walls, which were made of the same ivory material as the castle, and the Ehrenfest dormitory were lined with thick, massive pillars, evenly spaced out between tall windows. The sunlight that streamed into the room reflected off the radiant walls, making the library interior look especially bright. There truly was an abundance of white, but the pillars and walls were adorned with enough engravings that the decorations didn't seem too plain. It looks a little bit like the temple in a sense. At the center of the library was an atrium where more light poured in through a ceiling window, and on the left-hand side was a broad staircase leading up to the second floor. There were bound to be even more books waiting for me up there. A library with 2 whole floors. Be still, my beating heart. I wanted to start reading straight away, but nope. Everything from the smallest scrap of parchment to the largest tome. My head was already swimming with the questions. Where would the best reading spot be? Where was it brightest in this electricity-free library? Which spot was the closest to the bookshelves? In the first place, were there any spots set aside specifically for reading? I eagerly scanned the reading room in search of answers. Milady, are you searching? Questions? Schwartz and Weiss called out to me as I glanced around. Where should I read, I wonder? Is there a good place just for reading books, I asked. Yes, over here. The 2 shoe mills cut straight to the library, heading down where we had stood at the door to the very back. I followed after them, all the while eyeing the books on the bookshelves. They weren't the sort with elegant leather covers that I was used to seeing in the castle, or rather thin boards held together with string. I had assumed that there would be a plethora of thick, fancy-looking books here, what with this being the Royal Academy Library, but that didn't seem to be the case. In fact, the books here were a lot more like documents. Tags hung from the documents to indicate the school years and subjects of their contents. These are fairly simple covers. Are these books the bulk of what you keep on the shelves, I asked. The books available on the first floor are all study guides written by students, Solange answered. It seemed that the library purchased them from those with high grades and neat handwriting to aid the poorer nobles. Giving the books all fancy leather covers simply wasn't feasible, as not only did the library buy so many books, but they also had to source replacements for those that were damaged or went missing. I gazed across the shelves and gave an understanding nod. The books I had made in Ehrenfest would fit right in so long as I slapped some wooden covers on them. Covers or no covers, the smell is heavenly. Nothing serves as a more pleasant reminder that I'm completely surrounded by books. I deeply inhaled as we reached the back wall of the library. There were square pillows so thick I could just be barely able to touch both sides of one if I stretched out my arms all the way. A number of equally tall windows lined the walls between them, in front of which were a few simple wooden desks and chairs, much likely to make use of the sunlight. Upon closer inspection, the wooden partitions I had seen from way back at the entrance were actually little doors. They seemed to be locked, so I could guess that the students weren't allowed access to them freely. These are Carol's. We have the keys. We lend them out. They even have Carol's! The gaps between the pillars, which each seemed to be roughly 1 square meter each, were being used as reading spaces with partitioned-off desks known as Carol's. It seemed they were basically treated as private rooms, and just seeing them was enough to send my excitement through the roof. The desk immediately in front of us wasn't currently being used, but there were still books and boards and some ink stacked upon it. You can study, you can read, you can sleep too. Many people sleep. I can imagine. Having the warm sunlight shining down on you would be enough to make anyone sleepy, especially right after lunch. Oh, definitely. I looked around to see if anyone here was taking a nap, but the reading room was near enough empty. There were a few people sitting in the carrels, but I couldn't see anyone walking around. It was such a waste having so many books and desks going completely unused. I see not many people use the library, I commented. That's not true, milady. It's only true now. Schwartz and Weiss always spoke with excessive brevity, so Solange took it upon herself to elaborate. Few senior students passed their written classes straight away, and most of the first years who passed on their first day have not yet been registered, so this is when the library is at its quietest. Once we reach the midpoint of winter, however, there will be so many students here that we won't have enough carrels for them all. We're always at our busiest right before final exams. It turned out that archnobles preferred to pay the deposit on books they needed to study, and then take them back to their rooms rather than use the cramped carrels. Lay nobles and men nobles could rarely afford this option, and so they were the ones to stay at the library. It thus came to pass that students tried to barricade themselves in carrels between classes, even treating them like their own rooms. As a men noble, I myself struggled with studying back in the day, so I understand how they feel, Solange began with a smile. However, I still found it rather troubling when students leave their books in the carrels. They simply expect to keep their places until they finish transcribing what they need. The carrels at the south end of the library were the most popular study spots since they received the most sun from the windows. Those on the west side and near the hall, meanwhile, were fairly unpopular since they didn't get as much light. This was especially the case for the west side, where the sun was only seen when it was already starting to descend. Status placed a key role in the battle for carrels, and it seemed the lay nobles of lesser duchies tended to get stuck with the least desirable locations on the west side and near the entrance. I want a carrel too. There truly was nothing more wonderful than having a space near the bookshelves where one could sit and read on their own leisure. I resolved to claim one of the carrels as my own the moment I conquered all of my practical lessons. Schwartz and Weiss began heading to the counter where work was done. Those sitting in the nearby carrels looked up as they heard us pass, then blinked in surprise upon seeing the shoe mills. I could assume that someone would need to be about as old as Ferdinand to recognize them, considering that the last time they had been helping with library business was before the Civil War. Interestingly enough, though, the surprise of the students seemed to suggest that walking magic tools weren't particularly commonplace or normal to see. Professor Solange, I haven't seen any moving magic tools like Schwartz and Weiss before, but are they actually common here at the Royal Academy? No, they are quite rare. It is standard to hide the results of one's research, and my predecessor said that the method used to create them has been lost entirely. I am told they were made by a princess of the past, and so they always address their masters as female. They're all milady to them. It seemed that even men were addressed as such. I could hear a few of the other Airfest students quietly chuckling to themselves as they imagined male librarians having to endure the name with embarrassed grimaces. Professor Solange, how are the books organized on your shelves? If you have a categorization system, I would very much like to hear about it. Our books are organized according to when we acquire them. Everyone prefers the newest ones, after all. That made sense. What with the books on the first floor all being study documents, the older students would apparently scramble to get these new books when the library opened on the first day of written lessons, and as expected, the Archduke candidates and archnobles would always leave with the very best ones. Many didn't even return them, deciding to instead relinquish their deposits, which made things a lot harder for Solange. They didn't even bring back the books, I asked, completely taken aback. Could you not demand their return via ordinance? This approach worked when we had archnoble librarians among our staff, but I am just a men noble, you see. All of my complaints are simply ignored. The Archduke candidates and archnobles rich enough to leave their deposits behind were of a high enough status that they could completely ignore Solange without any repercussions. It must have been a massive inconvenience for her. Where did the archnoble librarians go? They were reassigned to other positions after the Civil War. My predecessors entrusted me with Schwartz and Weiss, saying that I would manage with their assistance, but my mana alone was not enough for them. I could not make them move by myself. It seemed it was the shoemill's job to handle the carrels, as well as the lending out and returning of reading materials. The mana from Solange's predecessors had allowed them to continue moving for about a year after they were reassigned, but then Schwartz and Weiss had stopped moving entirely. Solange had mournfully set them on one of the bookshelves in her office, having no choice but to continue her work alone. Here we lend, here you return. Once we arrived at the workspace, Schwartz and Weiss fought to climb up onto two nearby chairs as quickly as possible. It seemed this was actually a regular desk rather than a counter, but it was apparently where the library's paperwork was done. The two shoemills slapped their paws on the tabletop, then began their explanation. There were several bookshelves around the desk, lined with documents and tools for work. The sight sent a wave of nostalgia rushing through me as I remembered my time spent in my school's library committee back in my Arano days, and the part-time library jobs I had worked. Speaking of which, I don't see any other librarians here, I noted as I continued looking around. Solange's expression clouded over. We are suffering such a lack of personnel that I doubt they will ever spare me any scholars. As it turned out, she was running the library entirely by herself. Her higher-ups assumed that her job was as simple as handling registrations, but there was much, much more to being a librarian than they realized. Surely you have a lot more work to do than everyone expects. How are you finding the time to do everything? I asked. The term is usually over by the time I have finished managing the books and registering and deregistering those students, so I do all of my other work from spring to autumn when there are fewer students here. How awful. The thought alone was enough to make my head spin. Could this be my time to shine? Things definitely won't be the same here, but I've spent more than enough time working in libraries. This place is absolutely wonderful, and I want to do everything I can to ensure it runs smoothly. If students can't become librarians, then maybe I can at least form a library committee? I mean, this is a school, and every school needs a library committee. Okay, perfect. Professor Solange, I had intended to say establish a library committee to help you with your work. Before I could finish, blue and red lights shone down on the library. I glanced up in surprise, expecting to see massive stained glass windows overhead, but there was nothing of the sort. In fact, there didn't seem to be any explanation for the multicolored lights whatsoever. The lights disappeared after a few seconds, at which point the few people using the library closed their books and stood up in unison. What were those lights? I asked. An announcement to leave for afternoon class, as Solange explained. Some students become so immersed in their studies that they do not hear the bells, but even they notice when the lights shining on their heads change colors. That is why we use them here in the library to signal when the bell's about to ring. I nodded gravely, understanding just how easy it was to become so absorbed in a book that you stop paying attention to all the noise around you. I've probably done that too. From behind me, I could hear Villarda mutter, "That is good to know." Professor Solange, one student said, "Here is the key to my corral. Yes, you have practical lessons this afternoon, correct? Good luck." One by one, the students handed Solange their keys and hurriedly exited the reading room, still curiously eyeing Schwartz and Weiss. Villarda watched them go with a smile, then pointed at the door. "Well then, my lady, now seems as good a time as any for us to leave for your practical lessons as well." "All you wanted was to enter the reading room, yeah? Save the rest for when you've passed your classes," Wolfried added. "We're going to be late if we don't leave soon," Cornelius agreed. I looked up at the second floor and sighed, having not had enough time to see what was up there. It was tragic that I hadn't gotten to read a single book either, but my hands were tied here. On the bright side, I was more motivated than ever before. I have seen more reading materials than I could wish for, inhaled that sweet book scent, and spoke to Solange about all manner of things. My lust for coming back to the library was burning hotter than the sun. "I'll pass all my classes as soon as possible, then hole up in here 24/7. "No, you're not holding up in here 24/7. Not if Villarda and the others have anything to say about it. You gotta eat, you gotta sleep. You got tea parties you're gonna have to go to and stuff. Who knows what you're gonna have to do." My fists were clenched with resolve as I made my way out of the reading room. Schwartz and Weiss followed closely behind to see us off, but when we arrived at the door, they reached out and tugged on my sleeve. "We did our job, my lady. Praise us." Schwartz and Weiss were standing before us with their eyes closed. I glanced over at Solange, unsure of what they were expecting me to do. Lady Rosemine stroked the face stones on their foreheads and poured some mana into them. "That will allow Schwartz and Weiss to continue their work with renewed vigor," she explained. I naturally wanted the two shoemales to stay functional while I was busy passing on my remaining exams, so I poured some mana into their face stones as instructed. "Schwartz, Weiss, thank you for the tour. Please listen to what Professor Solange says and continue to assist her with her work," I said. "Okay, we'll help, Solange. New clothes, then?" Schwartz agreed at once, but Weiss's request was so truncated that I once again had to tilt my head in confusion. Solange turned her gaze to the ceiling as she dug through ancient memories, then suddenly clapped her hands together. "It is customary for Schwartz and Weiss to receive new clothes when their master changes. They want you to give them new clothes as well, Lady Rosemine. I imagine those will take around a year to prepare since I have no seamstresses here in the Royal Academy. Nor any cloth prepared. Is that acceptable? Getting clothes for the both of them would take some time, and it definitely wasn't something I could have finished by the end of winter." Schwartz and Weiss nodded. "New clothes take time. We know." It seemed they were happy to wait, which meant I would have plenty of time to make cute clothes for them. "Speaking of which, Professor Solange, are Schwartz and Weiss boys or girls?" My, Lady Rosemine, magic tools have no gender. They care less about the style of the clothes they wear and more about the fact they came from their master. These magic tools were shaped after living creatures, and yet it turned out they were completely genderless. There had apparently been some Some generations when Schwartz and Weiss were dressed as girls, some when they were dressed as boys, and some when they were dressed as neither. What should I have them wear? Whatever clothes I pick, they'll need a library committee armband for sure, and if they're getting armbands, then I want one as well. I'll ask Tuli to make them when I get back to Ehrenfest. Well then, I shall finish my classes as soon as possible and return to the library. Please contact me at once if Schwartz and Weiss are ever in need of Mormana, I said to Solange before finally leaving the library. Schwartz and Weiss stood at the door, waving me goodbye as I went. Oh, so cute! Okay, time to blast through my practical lessons, too. Everyone is going to flip their shit when they see Schwartz and Weiss active in anime form. Oh my god, they are so cute! And I can't even really see them that well. Court etiquette and Hersher's visit. Ooh, I'm excited. How far have I gotten? Dang, there was more pages this time than the last one. I mean, it makes sense considering she's going into the Royal Academy in this volume. We exited the library and stepped into the hallway which connected to the buildings for our scholars and attendants. Wilfred and I instructed the apprentice scholars and the attendants serving as our retainers to go to their respective buildings, while we returned to the central building with our apprentice knights and the first and second years. When we got back, Judith and the second years headed for the auditorium. Feline and her group went to the lay noble classes, and then Roderick and his group went to the classroom for men nobles. We Archduke candidates went to the small hall as usual, but proper court etiquette was extremely nuanced and changed in subtle ways depending on one's status, so a separate classroom was being used for archnobles. Once we arrived, our adult retainers said they would return for us later, then left. You sure look motivated, Rosamine, Wilfred nodded as we headed inside, but of course, my grand return to the library relies on me passing these classes as soon as possible. I intend to have my court etiquette studies over and done with by the end of the day. Is that something you can finish by the end of the day? Because that seems like something that would go on the whole entire year. Despite all my efforts so far, the closest I had gotten to my dream was touring the first floor of the library. I hadn't even been able to read a single book. I was going to pass these practical lessons and then hole up among the bookshelves no matter what it took. I'd even give my life if it meant finally gaining complete access to the library, I added. Well, it's good that you're motivated, Wilfred said, sitting on one of the seats labeled 13 before muttering something about how things probably wouldn't go as well as I was expecting. I have to agree. It'd be too easy. First years are expected to know court etiquette for greetings and the proper way to behave at tea parties, our professor, a woman called Primavera began. As I'm sure you're all aware, once your lessons are over, tea parties between duchies will be held for diplomatic and social purposes. A common and shared understanding of etiquette is necessary so that you do not displease each other at these gatherings. You have all been educated in the basics, but there is a tendency for Archduke candidates to become slack over time. And their status as the highest authority, and their home duchies often make them inexperienced at maintaining a polite form. To that end, we will be holding a faux tea party here in class, with the idea being that a member of the royal family has invited you. We will see how your court etiquette withstands a meeting with an individual of such superior status, and I am sure the experience will serve as a useful reference for you all moving forward, in case you ever encounter royalty in the future. Which I imagine you probably would. Considering we already met the second prince in our mock tea party, Professor Primavera would be posing as the theoretical royal in question, while the 3 assistant professors would observe our etiquette and mark us based on the contents of our conversations, our expressions, the manner in which we eat and drink, and so on. Due to how thorough these checks were going to be, we were divided into 2 groups: Archduke candidates from the 1st to 10th duchies, and candidates from the 11th to the bottom duchy. We shall begin with the highest-ranked Archduke candidates, Primavera announced, prompting the higher-ranking Archduke candidates to stand. Their first task was to greet the royal who had invited them to the tea party, starting with the highest-ranked student. It was clear from the way the highest-ranking candidate held themselves that they had plenty of prior experience to work with. They lined up smoothly, then started the greetings without hesitation. Feline had mentioned that court etiquette teachers tended to be gentle and overall quite relaxed in nature, and that few students ever failed, so I initially watched the proceedings without much interest. Please try again from the very beginning. What? Well, I mean, for Feline, they're not going to have to worry as much about the court etiquette stuff because they're lay nobles. The Archduke candidates are going to have to be drilled. It's going to be brutal for them. Much to my surprise, however, one student after another received a failing mark at the very first stage. Primavera merely shook her head at them, wearing a calm smile that left no reason for debate. That is simply not good enough for a tea party with royalty. Archduke candidates must be better, she said. Future archdukes will invariably have meetings and tea parties with the royal family as the Archduke Conference, so it will do you well to focus as much as possible. It seemed that passing this class right away was going to be harder than I thought. I straightened my back and watched as the higher-ranking Archduke candidates all steeled themselves. No matter how closely I examined them, however, I couldn't figure out what was wrong with their greetings. They all seemed very much by the book. Each student was made to repeat themselves at least once, and thus began a somewhat awkward tea party. The way Primavera is staring them down and making them repeat themselves over and over. It feels like one of those job interviews where the interviewer is deliberately trying to psych you out. Is she just seeing how they react to being bossed around unfairly, since Archduke candidates are used to being of the higher status than those around them? The others and I were watching from a considerable distance away, so we couldn't hear the exact contents of the conversations. I could, however, tell that some of the students had already wilted under the pressure of being made to repeat themselves again and again. They began each attempt with nervously wavering eyes, desperately trying to ensure they weren't doing anything wrong to avoid having failed again. It seems even harder than expected, Wolfried muttered to me under his breath. Primavera wasn't making the students repeat themselves anymore, but those serving as attendants behind her and the other professors were now writing on their boards. It'd probably be wise to consider them part of the interview as well. It seems Dragonot, the goddess of time, has woven today's threads with exceptional speed and grace, Primavera intoned. It was a euphemism that pretty much meant, time flies when you're having fun. With that, the faux tea party came to a close. The higher-ranking Archduke candidates and their farewells before going back to their seats, or said their farewells before going back to their seats, while those playing the roles of attendants cleaned up after them, then began replacing the tea and sweets for us lower-ranking Archduke candidates. Meanwhile, the professor looked at the boards they had been writing on and started announcing the results. Ninth, you must take care to remain graceful. Pay more attention to how you move your fingers. My apologies. Third, do not speak only of yourself. Always listen to those around you. Second, you are an Archduke candidate of a greater duchy. Act confidently and carry yourself with more dignity. Seventh, judging by the professor's feedback, the most important thing to remember was to keep one's composure no matter how tense the situation became. One needed to wear a confident smile at all times and refrain from ever looking down at the floor, the very same rules that have been constantly drilled into me since I started my life as a noble. Remain graceful, watch your surroundings. I should be fine as long as I follow Mother's teachings. Lord Wolfried and Lady Rosemary the 13th, please enter. The exam was already well underway by the time we were called. We had been told ahead of time that it was included waiting elsewhere and arriving at the tea party, so I straightened my back as elegantly as possible before extending a hand to Wolfried with a pleasant smile. He blinked in surprise, having not expected my request for him to escort me, then took my hand at once. It would have been difficult, if not impossible, for me to gracefully stand up from my seat without his help. When the two of us arrived before Primavera, Wolfried greeted her first. He knelt, crossed his arms in front of his chest, and bowed his head. May I pray for a blessing in appreciation of this serendipitous meeting ordained by the harsh judgment of Overlord, the god of life. You try again. Wolfried momentarily lowered his eyes, having expected that response, then repeated the greeting as instructed. Primavera made him do it twice more, watching him quietly all the while. I could see that he was gritting his teeth in frustration. That is enough, Lord Wolfried, Primavera eventually said with a small sigh, waving a hand to dismiss him. He stood up silently and left. It was my turn to step forward next. I met Primavera's watchful gaze, smiled once, then knelt gracefully before crossing both arms in front of my chest. May I pray for a blessing in appreciation of the serendipitous meeting ordained by the harsh judgment of Overlord, the god of life. Try again, as you wish. I deepened my business smile, then gave the greeting again, this time speaking even more politely than before. You may. Yay! You didn't have to repeat it more than once! Or more than twice, I mean. I was able to secure passing marks on my second try. As I moved to my seat at the tea party table, Wolfried, who had been waiting to escort me, muttered frustrated, You managed it after a single repeat, huh? The trick is to imagine her not as a professor, but as a true royalty, I advised, all the while maintaining my polite smile and continuing to face forward. I did, Wolfried replied, though I could tell he wasn't truly aware of what I meant. He had barely ever interacted with people of a higher status than himself, so even though he thought he understood how to treat Primavera as a royalty, he didn't get it in the slightest. Lord Wolfried, here is your seat, said one of the professors. Wolfried instinctively moved in the direction indicated to him, forcing me to pinch his arm and smile harder. That seemed to get the message across as he immediately turned and started guiding me to my seat instead. I made sure to courteously raise a hand to the professor along the way. I clearly needed to give Wolfried some advice, but we naturally couldn't exchange many words with the professor and those playing the roles of attendants watching our every move. Brevity was crucial. Unlike the Archduke candidates of the highest-ranking duchies, who had truly never had anyone they needed to bow their heads to, Wilfrid was no stranger to being reprimanded for his mistakes. This was partly the reason he had ultimately grown used to bowing his head to Ferdinand, someone he had once hated. So long as he used these experiences to his advantage, this lesson would surely be easy for him. Wilfrid, I whispered, Ferdinand is here watching us. Upon hearing those words, Wilfrid straightened his back in an instant. He was still facing forward with a smile, but his eyes had started to wander nervously. It seemed my message had proven effective. This is my seat. Thank you ever so much, Wilfrid. I expressed my gratitude with an encouraging smile once he had escorted me to my seat. Wilfrid returned a smile brimming with newfound confidence, then went to his own seat. Lady Rosemine, one of the attendants said, while pulling back my chair for me. It was much higher than I expected, causing me to blink in surprise. Climbing up onto the chair was certainly an option, but doing so would hardly be graceful. I gazed up at the attendant and placed a hand on my cheek in a textbook gesture of worry. It had worked on Fran and many others, so it would surely work on someone trained to be an attendant, or so I thought. The attendant merely blinked it back at me in confusion, not even attempting to lift me onto the chair. Is this part of the exam, I wondered, still maintaining the worried pose? What's the best move I can make here? The ideal situation would have been for the attendant to lift me right away, but it seemed they were testing me to see what I did with an attendant who was slow on the uptake. It was clearly unacceptable for me to climb onto the chair myself, and ask for her to pick me up directly was far too demeaning for the daughter of an archduke. I could never ever admit weakness like that. Is the right answer to find a way to overcome my weakness, or to complain about the attendant? I'm theoretically dealing with royalty here, so... The attendant and I stared each other down, and soon enough I realized I was the only one who hadn't yet taken my seat. I could tell that I was being watched not only by the Archduke candidates attending the milk tea party, but also by the higher-ranking Archduke candidates who had already finished theirs. Is something the matter, Lady Rosemine? Primavera asked. I turned to face her, my hand still on my cheek. Professor Primavera, we are here to act as though this is a tea party being hosted by royalty, correct? Yes, that is certainly correct, Primavera replied, an interested smile playing on her lips. This is probably the most important part of the exam for me, in which case it was crucial that I maintain my noble air and not break my poise. I was a guest, invited to a tea party by royalty. There was no need for me to cover for a mere attendant. Professor Primavera, is this attendant a recent hire? I am rather surprised they would make a mistake such as this, but please do not scold them too much, I said. It was exceedingly rude for a host to not understand the circumstances of their guests. Each time Elvira had arranged a tea party, she had made sure to stress to me the importance of catering to those you invited, whether they be meeting their preferences, adjusting their seating arrangements, or managing any personal treatment they required. In this regard, it was important to inform the on-duty attendants what would need to be prepared and what would need to be done on the day of. The rudeness of an attendant was by extension the rudeness of whoever they served. In the case of this tea party, the host was expected to know I was smaller than average and would thus struggle to sit down on my own. Preparation should have been made to ensure I was not inconvenienced, so by asking whether the attendant was a recent hire, I was indirectly pointing out that the host had neglected to gather information properly, inform their attendant of what to do, or adequately train them in the first place. In a sense, I was accusing them of minor laziness. Oh my, what a disaster, Primavera explained. She rang a bell while directing the attendant behind me to step down, and in an instant, another attendant arrived to help me onto my chair. Yay, you did it, girl! The fact that everything had been settled with a single ring of a bell suggested she had indeed gathered information in advance and informed her attendants about my issues, so in this case, the problem was nothing more than a single incompetent attendant. I do apologize for the inexperienced attendant, Lady Rosemine. Think nothing of it. It has been difficult to acquire high-quality attendants as of late, I replied, with a graceful smile now sitting on my chair. It was then that I noticed the attendant standing behind Primavera write something down. Ooh. With that, the tea party truly began. I treated it like a group discussion with food and drinks included, throwing harmless softballs to the kids who were silently nursing their tea to get them involved, pretending to listen to those raving passionately about one thing or another, and flattering the host by praising the tea and sweets she served. All in all, I worked pretty hard. A few problems arose in the form of clearly manufactured accidents, no doubt to see how we would react in the moment, and I made my decisions while looking around to see what the others were doing. There were a few instances where Wilfrid was goaded slightly, much like he had been when he initially greeted Primavera, but he handled it much more smoothly and with a courteous smile. My warning that Ferdinand was watching really had worked. It wouldn't surprise me if he was. Lord Wilfrid and Lady Rosemine of the 13th had passed, Primavera soon announced. They would do fine at any tea party held in the Royal Academy. In the end, Wilfrid and I were the only ones to pass court etiquette on our first day. Nice! Oh, now the other Archduke candidates are going to be pissed. Like, what are these two people? What did they do right? I contained the joy swelling within me, doing my best to keep my smile elegant. I am honored, I replied. The faux tea party was over, but I could still feel Primavera's eyes on me. I made a mental note to save my excitement for when I was back in the dormitory, and so I continued acting with grace even after leaving the classroom. I passed court etiquette, I yelled to Riarda with a beaming smile the very second the dormitory door was shut behind me. The sudden outburst was enough to shock my gathered retainers, while Wolfried's retainers looked at their charge with worry. And you, Lord Wolfried? I passed too, but only thanks to Rosemine. Her words really did work wonders, Wolfried noted, making his gratitude more than apparent. Riarda blinked, her curiosity quite evidently piqued. Wolfried, my boy, what did she say to you? I simply told him that Ferdinand was watching us, I said. While I was asleep, Wolfried had not only led the playroom, but also performed both spring prayer and the harvest festival in my place. This had meant spending time with Ferdinand, whether he liked it or not, and since Riarda knew this all too well, the revelation of my warning made her cackle. I said it would all pay off one day, my boy, and it seems that day came a lot sooner than we expected. Yep. I went to the common room after getting changed into new clothes, where I observed the others making study documents and purchasing information. I was trying to refrain from making any study documents myself, since that would mean stealing work from the lay nobles. Instead, I simply pointed out when their handwriting wasn't good enough or when their grammar was poor. While everyone was using trial and error to figure out the best way to make money, I planned ahead for my next class. What could I do to hasten my grand return for the library? I passed court etiquette, which meant I now needed to focus on my dedication whirl, music, high beast, and stat acquisition practical lessons. We were just practicing the dedication whirl this year, so I really doubted the professor would expect much from us. I decided to simply focus on the fundamentals. The most important thing for me was ensuring I didn't accidentally pray to the gods and cause any unnecessary problems. When it came to music, I had already been invited to a tea party by the professors, which surely meant I was above average. I just needed to negotiate a passing grade in exchange for publicizing a new song or two. My first high beast class had been suspended after Fraulein collapsed, but things would most likely continue from where they had left off. According to Herscher, a passing grade would be awarded once a student could take their high beast outside and fly one loop around the academy grounds, so I had nothing to worry about. As long as Professor Fraulein doesn't collapse again, that is. I was sure I could avoid any trouble by getting Herscher to assist Fraulein next time, but I really doubted she would ever interrupt our research to take on extra unnecessary work. The only way I could secure her help was by making it somehow worth her while. And tomorrow is staff acquisition. The first years would all enter a place known as the farthest hall to gather face stones, known as the Divine Will, which served as the main building block for staffs. I was worried that I would be unable to properly gather one, but Cornelius assured me that everything would be fine. I would apparently understand why the moment I got there. That said, there was more to the lesson than simply acquiring the face stone. I would also need to build a staff and learn the basics of using it. Where is Lady Rosemine? Came Herscher's voice. She had rushed into the common room right after I was summarizing my thoughts on how to pass my lessons. I blinked at her in surprise. For someone the older students had said only came to the dormitory on the first and final days of each term, she was sure was appearing a lot. What do you need today? I asked, drawing her attention to me. I just heard from a student that the library's magic tools were revived, he said, striding over with a fervent look of excitement on her face. How did you manage it? I am certain they were surrounded by a protective magic circle that prevented anyone but their master from touching them. In the past, those who had touched Schwartz and Weiss unprompted were apparently thrown back, which told me a bit about what crazy things protective charms could do. How had she figured out I was the one responsible, though? It could have been any one of the Ehrenfest students in the reading room. Why do you think I am the one who revived them? I asked. Herscher rolled her eyes. Because the Ehrenfest first years were seen touring the library with 2 large shoe mills, one black and one white. It does not take a genius to deduce that who among them was responsible. You, Lady Rosemine, are the only person who continuously commits such unprecedented acts, and you failed to inform me of this one. I didn't think activating Schwartz and Weiss was something that demanded your attention, especially considering how busy you are, I replied. Judging by the excitement lurking in Herscher's eyes, I could guess she cared less about being kept up to date on our dorm supervisory and more about experimenting on Schwartz and Weiss. As their new master, I had to protect them from her. Schwartz and Weiss can't leave the library. I believe they can if you are with them. I will not let you disassemble them, I said with a glare. Goodness me, I would never do such a thing. I simply want to remove their clothes. Do you have a thing for removing the clothes of magic tools, Professor Herscher? I asked, getting on the defensive in case she was even more of a weirdo than I thought. I am a professor specializing in the creation of magic tools, she shot back with a wry smile. It's only natural that I would want to learn more about two special magic tools, the designs of which remain a mystery to the world. As far as I know, the parts of their bodies hidden by their clothing offer clues as to how they were created. I simply wish to see those parts for myself. There was no mistaking the scholarly look in her eyes, but she still wanted to see them without their clothes on. My fears were more than justified. As their new master, it is my duty to protect Schwartz and Weiss. There is so much work at the library for Professor Stallings to reasonably handle alone, I said. Hersher knitted her slender brows together as she pondered the situation, then began tapping her temple with a finger, just as Ferdinand always did when he thought things over. Oh my gosh, Ferdinand really did get a bunch of his perks from Professor Hersher. It wouldn't surprise me. As I cackled on the inside, Hersher seemed to have a sudden epiphany. Her head shot up, her lips curved into a grin, and the eye behind her monocle glimmered with interest. As I recall, Lady Rosemine, it is tradition for Schwartz and Weiss's master to award them with new clothes, correct? Is that so? I replied, doing my best to play dumb. Hersher had been in the Royal Academy for a very long time, but I had no idea how much she knew about the subject. It seemed that my momentary hesitation was all she needed to confirm her suspicions, however, as her smile immediately broadened. Do allow me to accompany you while you are measuring them and changing their clothes, she said. Naturally, I will not touch them, nor remove the clothes myself. As far as I was concerned, that excuse was no better than saying something like, just let me follow you into the shower. Don't worry, though, I won't strip you myself. Before I could protest, however, Hersher continued, if you allow this, I will serve as the presiding professor for your remaining magecraft lessons. You are not allowed to enter the library until you have passed all your classes, correct? I assure you it will take you a very long time to secure a passing grade on your high beast lesson with how much Fräulein currently resents you. She's a demon. Hersher is a demon seducing your students in the dark side. After an intense battle of wits, I ultimately succumbed to the whispers of a demon who would make my life easier all the way to graduation. Also, why does Fräulein resent her? I mean, what did she do to her besides not making her high beast not a panda bus anymore? Probably because she made a fool out of her or something. How long have I been recording? 42 minutes. Do I have time? Still have to edit the video. I think I have time. Stab acquisition. I spent the morning working on study documents and practicing the Harspiel. Rosina had instructed me to practice from breakfast to third bell just like I would in the temple, and everyone else had ended up following suit. As a result, we all gathered in the common room and played together. I was preparing for my tea party with the professors while everyone else was practicing at their respective skill levels. More and more students from the other grades were finishing their written lessons as well, and it wasn't long before near enough everyone was practicing together. Some people tried studying in their rooms, but the noise must have been too much, as they usually came back in a short while later with their Harspiels in hand. I've been practicing a lot less recently since I haven't been able to secure regular practice time in the dormitory, one student said. With each year I advance, I get less praise from my music teachers in class. Then perhaps it would be unwise to permanently establish this period as Harspiel practice time, I replied. While I was practicing the songs I planned to debut at the tea party, Rosina started mercilessly purging the lyrics I had come up with myself. Lady Rosemine, as this is a song dedicated to Mestinora, the goddess of wisdom, might I suggest praising the Gruitschheit instead of the library? She went on to explain that the Gruitschheit was the original Bible owned by Mestinora herself. The first king of the country had been chosen by the gods and permitted to transcribe a copy. I decided it was best to leave the lyrics to Rosina, and soon enough my passionate lines about the library were reworked into verses admiring Mestinora, peppered with all sorts of theological references. But, well, I guess this is okay. I'd rather this than everyone getting even more weirded out by my love of the library, plus it greatly reduces the risk of me accidentally blessing everyone while I sing. Actually, Rosina, would you mind completely rewriting the song? I get a feeling that my lyrics about the library are going to result in me giving a blessing during my performance. Oh my, but what is wrong with giving a blessing while praying to the gods and singing a song in their honor, she replied. It seemed that her understanding of things was somewhat distorted, which was honestly to be expected when she had been raised in the temple, the house of the gods, beneath an art-loving shrine maiden. I doubt she realized that giving such a blessing at the Royal Academy would cause quite the stir. I'm doing my best to give as few blessings as possible, I explained. If you insist, Lady Rosemine, I will refrain from using any lyrics related to the library. Our spell practice came to an end at third bell, at which point I started helping Hartmut with his scholar study guides, while simultaneously learning more about the scholar course itself. Lady Rosemine, are you also intending to take the scholar course? He asked. Indeed, I intend to become a librarian, so I shall be taking the scholar course alongside the Archduke candidate course. I have already discussed this matter with Ferdinand, I replied while reading about the coursework for 3rd years. Are you not aiming to become Abba Ehrenfest? Not once have I ever even considered it. And as I said, I wish to become a librarian, so that role will do nothing but waste my time and effort. My current dream is to use my position as the Saint of Ehrenfest to conquer the temple's bookroom, or alternatively conquer the castle's bookroom while assisting the Archduke. My ambition burns for nothing else. My ultimate goal was to marry whoever owned the largest library and then sit among its bookshelves forevermore, but I naturally couldn't say that to my retainer. Girl, get your head out of the gutter when it comes to books, please. With this in mind, if you ever come to realize that serving me would only be a dead end for your career, please do tell me, I continued. I will allow you to leave without any hard feelings. My stab acquisition lesson was being held in the afternoon. Stabs were the perfect tool for efficiently and accurately wielding the mana within oneself, and only once had I at my own could I become an official noble. Ferdinand had mentioned that several researchers had attempted to make tools even more effective than stabs in the past, but none had succeeded. The quality of the material that went into making stabs was just on an entirely different level. Stab acquisition had initially taken place when 3rd years were being split into their specialized courses, but around 10 years ago, the current king had changed things so that they would be acquired as soon as new students entered the academy. As far as he was concerned, the faster one learned to use their staff, the better. From what I had been told, stab acquisition consisted of acquiring the divine will that served as the raw material for one staff, and then returning with it. This was the entire class, but it was an important event for becoming an adult noble. The first years all looked pretty excited on their way to the auditorium, while the older students on their way to their own lessons cheerfully urged them to calm down with nostalgic expressions. Were there always this many first years? I mused aloud, blinking in surprise. The entire grade was gathered in the auditorium for the staff acquisition. It only feels that way because you no longer have any written classes, Feline replied with a small smile. The sight didn't come as much of a shock to her because she was still attending geography and history classes. But as someone who hadn't gone to one since passing my exam, this was my first time seeing so many first years gathered in one place in quite a while. The busy auditorium fell silent the moment the professors arrived. Primavera stepped forward, then looked across the gathered students. Everyone is here, I see. I will soon be guiding everyone to the farthest hall, starting with the Archduke candidates. But first, there is one rule you must all obey under any circumstances. Do not touch anyone after you've gathered your divine will. It must be dyed with your mana and your mana alone in order to produce a high-quality staff. Space yourselves out such that you do not bump into anyone on the way back, and spend Earth Day tomorrow filling the divine will with mana. Once all the Archduke candidates were lined up, Primavera took the lead. There was a door at the back of the auditorium which led into another room. Wow, there's a chapel here! It was a pure white room with circular pillars spread out equal distances on either side of us. The furthest wall had a multicolored mosaic built into it from the ceiling to the floor, and in the middle of the room was a 40-some-step staircase, going up 3 stories high, on which were offerings for and statues of the gods. At the very top were the king and queen gods. On a lower step was the goddess of earth, who was holding a chalice. Then on an even lower step was the goddess of water, god of fire, goddess of wind, and god of life, all positioned in a line. I wonder what my attendants back at the temple were doing, I thought to myself, the familiar sight of the shrine having made me feel somewhat nostalgic. I knew they were most likely doing well, since they had managed just fine without me for 2 whole years, but I couldn't suppress my sudden urge to see Fran and the others. It seemed I was the only one who felt homesick upon seeing the altar. Everyone else was too busy gasping in awe. This is the furthest hall, the place closest to the gods, the Primavera explained. Everyone here shall only be given one opportunity to gather their divine will. As mentioned, take an exceptional amount of care not to bump into anyone else once you have yours. There are 2 paths, one of those for those entering and one for those exiting, so make sure to take the left path on your way back no matter what. With that, Primavera reached out to a face stone. An instant later, the shrine staircase began rumbling as it moved slowly to one side, revealing a gaping square hole that led deeper into the shrine. May you have the gods' protection and guidance. At Primavera's encouragement, the first Archduke candidate stepped into the hole, their expressions tense. Wilfrid and I followed after them. The shrine was made out of the same ivory stone as the Royal Academy and the dormitory, and even the hole was perfectly paved on all sides. Our footsteps echoed as we pressed onward. The path wasn't particularly narrow, and there was enough space for 3 people to walk next to each other. About 5 meters in, the square hallway suddenly became less uniform. The floor continued on, providing an ivory path for us to walk on, but the walls and ceiling were now made of crude rock. The hole had brought us into a natural cave. The only light source was the ivory path that glowed underfoot, which would guide us to the exit on our way back. Who knew a place like this would be behind a chapel shrine, I mused. I mumbled, looking around a little before continuing on. The ivory path snaked through the wide curves of the cave, and it seemed we were going ever upward. There were several staircases along the way, with another one popping up after a short walk. After a while, I could almost feel how much higher up we were. I've been power walking for so long, I'm going to lose my breath any moment now. Even with all the enhancers on me, I was only as strong as an average person, and when combined with my short stature, I was getting steadily farther away from the front. Go on ahead, I eventually said to the other candidates. As you can see, I'm shorter than you also, it is harder for me to match your pace. I moved to the side to let an Archduke candidate get by me. Wilfrid immediately offered to accompany me, but I turned him down. You can go on ahead, Wilfrid. I won't be able to return together anyway, but when you pass me on the way back, please do tell me how much further I have to walk. All right. Wilfrid didn't look very convinced, but he walked on with the other candidates nonetheless, repeatedly turning back to check on me. I sighed, now walking at my own pace. I was sure I could have kept up with the others for a while longer, but it was getting harder to maintain an air of grace while constantly power walking down this seemingly endless road. A short while after the Archduke candidates had disappeared up ahead, I heard some footsteps coming from behind me. It was the archnobles. Their eyes wavered as they debated whether they should say anything to the lone candidate walking all on her own, so I told them what I told the others and sent them on their way. Ehrenfest archnoble students looked over me over and over again with a worried expression as he walked on, much like Wilfrid had done. I continued along at my own pace, and next came the men nobles. They gave me bizarre looks, which I simply ignored as I told them to go on without me. Lady Rosemond, came a voice. Oh, hello, Roderick. You may go on ahead as well. I was partway through giving him the explanation I had repeated several times now when a men noble from another duchy walking at the front of the group suddenly shouted, Ah, there it is! What? I turned my gaze to where the boy was focused, but wasn't at all sure what he had found. To me, he seemed to be staring at the plain rock wall. There was nothing special there that I could see. His eyes, however, were locked on one spot in particular. He stepped off the ivory road toward it, then reached out a hand. I could tell from how assured his movements were that he was definitely seeing something, and when he turned around again, his fingers were curled as though he were holding an invisible tube of some kind. Sorry, could you make way? The boy asked with a pleased smile. He cut through the group, then sped along the path back to the entrance. His eyes remaining locked on whatever was in his hands. Did he find something? Roger asked. Did you see it, Lady Rosemond? No, it looked like he was holding nothing but air. Everyone who had seen the first person to find their divine will was immediately overcome with intrigue, and they slowed down to watch the cave walls more carefully. They were now moving at a pace I could comfortably keep up with, at which point Roderick and I started talking about the divine will and what kind of face stone it might be. It wasn't long before another person cried out, this time a girl. I found it, she shouted in a lively voice. Meanwhile, I could see another boy at the front of the group stray from the path and head closer to the wall. Everyone who claimed to find their divine will knew exactly where to go, so there was no denying they were actually there. Roderick started looking around as well, driven by how many others were finding their divine will. It was clear from his expression how much he wanted to spot his. Ah, he cried, his gaze suddenly focusing on a point further ahead on the path. Did you find yours, I asked? Yes, it's shining beautifully. I couldn't see what Roderick was looking at, as expected, but there was evidently something there. He smiled proudly and raced down the path, then reached toward the wall. I could tell he had touched something because his eyes widened in surprise. Then he hugged the face stone I couldn't see to his chest. Lady Rosemond, if you'll excuse me. Take care not to drop it or bump into anyone, I noted. Roderick started making his way back while I continued walking in the opposite direction. As everyone else was finding their face stones, some of the archnobles from earlier started walking back past us. They had evidently found theirs somewhere up ahead, and I could guess my face stone was going to be even deeper in the cave. I'm going to have to go all the way back to the back of the cave, aren't I? I'm exhausted already. I walked on at my own leisurely pace as fewer and fewer people surrounded me. Those who remained were steadily leaving the path to grab their face stones, so it was becoming both easier to walk and easier to see ahead. It was kind of sad seeing everyone leave one after another, though. Determined to continue, I walked, climbed stairs, and walked some more. It wasn't long before there was nobody else with me, and the only people I saw were those coming back. An odd-looking line had formed since the students were all trying to keep a fair distance away from each other so as to avoid accidentally bumping into one another. Given that this was around where the men nobles had found most of their divine wills, I could guess that the archnobles were returning from much further ahead. Eventually, some Archduke candidates started getting mixed in with the returning archnobles. I recognized everyone from my practical lessons, and soon enough, I saw Wolfred coming back among them. "You're still all the way back here?" he asked with wide eyes. "The Archduke candidate face stones are way deeper inside." He was cradling something in his hands as well, which encouraged me to pour some mana into my enhancers. Doing this would make walking considerably easier, but I had to be careful about how much mana I used. If I used too much, my muscles would ache so badly tomorrow that I wouldn't even be able to move. I slowly increased my pace, aiming for the furthest point of the cave. Soon enough, there weren't even any candidates walking back. I truly was alone, the only noise being the light patter of my echoing footsteps. I climbed more stairs, found nothing on the walls, then climbed yet more stairs. The lack of people and repetitive scenery was boring to say the least. "Where are you, my precious little face stone? I'm so tired." Of course, there was no response. My words merely echoed through the cave. The ivory path led to yet another staircase, but this one was unique. Unlike the others that had contained reasonably fewer steps, this was a spiral staircase that seemed to go up an entire story. "Ugh, another staircase. Seriously, how far am I going to have to walk?" I grumbled while starting to climb the white spiral staircase. My surroundings got brighter the higher I climbed, until eventually... Wow! I exited into a white plaza. It seemed to be a dead end, since there was no longer a path going forward. The ivory floor was now circular, and in the middle was a large sculpture of a tree that seemed to be made of the same ivory substance as everything else. Its white branches covering and equally white leaves extended outward, stretching up to a large hole in the middle of the ceiling through which light was streaming down. At the base of the tree was a face stone glowing a rainbow of colors. It was sticking straight up out of the ground and looked a lot like a vertical crystal hexagon. It stretched all the way to my stomach. "Ah, this is it. This is my stone." Just as everyone had said, I recognized the face stone in an instant. The sunlight streaming through the tree branches made it turn all sorts of different colors. It was like a dream, and with a sense of reverence in my heart, I started making my way toward the stone. It gleamed as I came closer. "I'll be taking this." I knelt in front of the divine will and reached my hands out. The second I touched its surface, it slid up out of the ground and started floating in front of me as if asking me to take it. I hugged the divine will to my chest as it showed a variety of colors, then let out a pleased sigh. Okay, time to go back. I would need to take the divine will all the way back to the entrance of the tunnel, and so with it firmly secured in my arms, I tried pouring some mana into my enhancers. Huh? Any mana I tried pouring into the enhancers was immediately sucked up by my face stone. I wouldn't be able to physically enhance myself any more than I already was, so I seemed I would need to get back to my current state. Just thinking about the long road ahead was enough to make me slump my shoulders. Standing in place wouldn't do me any good, so I turned my back to the massive ivory tree and started my journey back to the chapel. This time I would be alone from start to finish. I fearfully climbed down the spiral staircase, cradling the face stone in both arms all the while. Once again, the only noise was the echo of my footsteps. The way back was certainly easier since I was going down rather than up, but my lack of stamina was really starting to show. Okay, I need a break, I said to myself. Even with the enhancers, this is exhausting. Somewhere along the way back, I sat down on a set of stairs to rest with the face stone still in my arms. Everything looked so identical that I had no idea how much further I needed to go. I leaned against the wall and let out a heavy sigh, praying that the exit was nearby, and it was then that the exhaustion hit me like a strong wave. I could feel my eyelids starting to droop, and soon enough, no matter how hard I tried to fight it, my consciousness slipped away. "Don't go to sleep, you'll die if you do," came a sudden roar. "Wake up, stand up, your life has only just begun." What? The voice echoed through the cave like thunder, making my ears ring. I shot up at once, only to see Roffin waiting nearby, his fists tightly clenched with determination as he continued calling out to me. "Whew, good to see you're back on your feet," he said, stepping back to reveal the other professors standing behind him. Hersher came forward to take his place, then explained the circumstances to me. It seemed I had taken so very long to return that they had thought it necessary to send out a search party for me. Hersher had initially gone alone. She had been certain that I hadn't gotten lost, given that there was a linear path, and she soon found me passed out against the wall. Since I already had my divine will, however, she wasn't able to touch me. She had no choice but to try calling out to me, but I didn't respond no matter how hard she tried. In a panic, Hersher had rushed back to the chapel, then returned with several other professors. Only when Roffin, the loudest of them all, shouted at me did I finally wake up again. "I had heard you were in poor health, and for a moment there I was truly worried you had died," Hersher said. "My apologies. Ferdinand had told me you were not fully healthy again, but it seemed to be doing just fine in the Royal Academy, so I ended up letting my guard down, she admitted while gesturing for me to follow her out. And that was how the Saint of Ehrenfest nearly climbed the towering stairway on her journey to acquire her divine will. It hadn't been my intention, but I was now the focus of yet another new legend in the Royal Academy history. Wow. Okay. Dang it. I don't want to stop, but I got to. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Maybe I'll finish this tomorrow or the day after. I don't know.